What's up, everybody? Welcome to El Big League Show. We got a new setup here. Still figuring out the kinks with former MLB exec Adrian Lorenzo. We got a lot to get into here today. The Dodgers, the $391 million roster, most talked about team in the sport with the most talked about player in the sport, many other stars. A little bit of an unfamiliar cold streak. We'll break that down. What's happening? How can they climb out of it? Are the Padres the new big dogs out west? So we'll talk about that. Also, Garrett Crochet, possibly the best pitcher in the game right now. Take it back to his scouting process. How did he slip out of the top 10 of the first round? And what are some of the lessons to learn from that evaluation process? And more to talk about, including a new position player star, potentially, for the Baltimore Orioles making his debut. I'm here with Adrian Lorenzo. Adrian, how we doing?
What's up, Danny? Doing great. Always excited to be talking baseball on Mondays.
Yeah, man.
Mondays are a bit of a slow baseball day overall in the normal calendar of things. So that's why El Big League Show is intentionally selected for Mondays, right? So very excited.
No, man, fired up. And I wanted to get right into it here with the Dodgers because since July 4th, which I was actually in Dodger Stadium last July 4th, they always do it big. Since this July 4th, 9-game lead in the division evaporates. Now we're talking about a 12-21 record. Offense is dropping. Pitching continues to go through it. And the defense, which we'll talk about here in a second, really collapsing on them. Big picture, what are you seeing with the Los Angeles Dodgers?
To me, it's hard to sustain the pace that they had early on, right? So, like, these things are broken up into different phases, right? You either want to start good, right? Everybody wants to get off to a good start just to give you good momentum. I think every team would prefer to have a good start. They did. They had a really good start, sprinted to the beginning of their division, have been in control of their division for how long? Until just now lately, where they're in a wild card spot. So we're talking about them sliding and struggling. They're still squarely in a wild card position. Not the greatest thing you want to see if you're the Dodgers, to have this recent run of 25 plus games where it's not going your way necessarily. But there's still a long time left. Like, they're still in a driver's seat position with some assets coming back. I think you mentioned Tanner Scott, Michael Kopech, Kirby coming back. So, there's not Kirby, Yates. So there's some the cavalry to a certain extent with their bullpen that it's gassed. It's a gassed bullpen based on so many starter injuries as well as bullpen injuries. So it's been the fact that they've sustained this pace for almost 2/3 of the season now is impressive and a credit to them, given the injuries that they've racked up, especially to their starting pitching. So you have less innings out of your starters, you're going to tax your bullpen more, and they've just had to do that on the front end of the season. This second half of the season is going to be where we'll see if they get some injured players back. I think they're going to make a push. But I think if you go back to last year, I remember talking to some players in that clubhouse even where their concerns were they were running out of pitching at this point last year as well. Mm-hmm. And they would go on to, win the World Series. So it really depends. Like, I've seen teams rush, like, bulldoze into the end and get momentum right into the end and push that momentum all the way through. But there's also teams that catch momentum and fire late, show up to the postseason and fall flat. The Dodgers last year were the opposite. They were kind of sputtering into the postseason and they'd go on their run. And I'm never going to count them out in this dynamic. So while they're interesting to talk about right now because they're struggling. They've really lost command of that first place in the NL West. I think they're still in a position to make a run, and they've had some underperformances from some of their players. So I don't buy that Mookie Betts is what he's been to this point. I think if Mookie Betts comes in and has a strong postseason, I think he went deep last night against the Padres. Comes in and has a good postseason, all of a sudden you're a little more wind in your sails. It makes sense that the Dodgers are sputtering here with how many injuries they had on the front end.
If you just take a step back, I know we've talked about, you said, put the money aside. This team has some of the best processes and just overall organization in baseball. Then you add $391 million payroll. It seems that they're not getting what they're paying for out of their starting pitchers just as a general rule, right? Obviously, most teams would want to have these arms in the fold, right? We can talk about some of these guys. But when you think about, they don't pitch when they're healthy that long relative to other team starters. Whether it's, name any of these guys, they don't pitch that long into games. They are injured quite frequently. and there's been some underperformance at times. So, I mean, it's like, yes, there's a lot of elite arms that could dominate a postseason game, but I'm not sure if you just put buck for what they get out of these guys, they're getting the most out of their starting pitching, even separate from some of the injuries.
Yeah, I think that it all depends on how you feel about usage, right? Like if you think that pitchers should go 6 to 7 innings, if that's philosophically where you land, then, how frequently can you do that? It's a sliding scale because yes, you want pitchers to go deeper into the games, but you also want pitchers to make 30 plus starts. So it's like, do you want 30 plus 5.5 inning starts, 4.5 inning starts, or do you want 12 7-inning starts? It's a sliding scale depending on how the rest of your pitching staff is compiled and how you can bridge games late, right? So how you can bridge the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. And so the Dodgers have leaned on the side of shorter leashes, let's say, on the starting pitcher front because they've had this extended, stretched bullpen where they could still, we just need 4 and change out of you. We need 5 and change, 5 and 2/3 out of you, and we'll match up in the spot that makes the most sense to get you out of there instead of trying to get 7 out of you because we have the depth. The problem with that is when you get injured. When you get injured and your starter depth gets decimated, all of a sudden you're having to utilize guys different. You're leaning on guys to now maybe we need this guy to go 7 or 8, but now he's stretching past. Now they're out of their comfort zones and using guys longer than they wanted to. So you mentioned that the Dodgers have some of the best processes in baseball, and I think that they do. Right, I really do. I don't think, at least there aren't 5 teams that have better processes, medical strength, whatever we want to put this pitching. And they've taken a conservative overall approach in terms of what they expect out of the outings of their starters, and they're still getting hurt at a really high clip. This is best philosophy, best process in the game, spending money in this area, and they're still suffering a rash of injuries, at a higher rate than teams that spend 1/10 of what they spend on medical research, R&D, things like that. And that to me is more emblematic of the era that we're in with pitcher injuries. Like, we don't know what's going on here or why. Nobody can point. People can guesstimate as to, are they throwing more earlier in travel ball now? And that's why they're getting hurt later. But there's 5 examples that fly in the face of that, of guys that threw all through travel ball through their whole lives and have maintained some degree of health in the big leagues. Or guys that didn't pitch at all now get to the big leagues, they should have a fresh arm and they get hurt, after a recent conversion. So we've seen the whole spectrum of pitcher injuries, and we've seen it affect the best organizations in baseball hardest. So that to me tells me that we don't have this injury thing figured out. I'd say we don't have the scouting thing figured out, this makeup thing figured out. I think this pitcher injury one is just really, it's opaque, right? Like we can't apply a clean, this is why pitchers are getting hurt so often. Now, guys from a previous era threw 350 innings at times. Randy Johnson's numbers, Kurt Schilling's numbers, Pedro Martinez, Nolan Ryan. Like, you can't tell me those guys weren't throwing 100%, right? They were going deep into games. They were throwing often. Maybe they were plugged into some processes that allowed them to do those things that we don't have access to now. But most organizations employ a lot of those guys that pitched in that era. There has been an attempt to, certain organizations have increased how much they have guys throw and their volume and their intensity. And we still don't have a final answer. I'm sure I'm going to get beat up here in either the comments or, just at large, because I think that there are medical departments with strong convictions that they do, to a sense, have it figured out. But this happening to the Dodgers shows me that we don't, because they would have this figured out if this was figure outable. I think you can make some educated guesses. I remember going through the process with Yuri Perez, for example. He comes up as a rookie and is sensational right away. But he comes up later in the season, so he's already built up 70, 80 innings, already setting highs, career highs of total innings in a season. He comes into the big leagues and is good, and you have to start having the discussion of, okay, are we going to limit this guy's overall innings? Are we going to shut him down to then ramp him back up? For a starting pitcher, that's tricky too. So we defaulted, I think, and this was contentious in the room in terms of philosophically, should we hold him back from innings? Should we just kind of let him pitch? The conservative decision was made in the best interest of the player and the organization to shorten his season, right? And he was not going to pitch in the postseason when we really needed him to. Against the Phillies in 2023, it would have been nice to have Yuri Perez starting one of those postseason games, But the decision was made for the player's best interest to shut it down. The following season, he would go out and get hurt anyway.
Before the season, right? So his next start was in 2025.
Right. So, and that wasn't the case of running him to limits. That was really being mindful and cautious with a good strength and conditioning plan, with a cohesive, coherent medical plan as to why we're doing this, because you have to explain it to the public why we're shutting him down when we're making a push into the postseason. He was arguably the best pitcher on that team. I bring it up as an example of, like, even when you go the conservative route, you can still end up hurt. The other side of it is Sandy Alcantara. You can make the argument, okay, well, yeah, he pitched 200 plus innings. He would go 8 strong, 9 strong at times, and he gets hurt. So, like, you get hurt on both sides of this. So where do you really land? And like I said, emblematic of the era that we're in with pitcher injuries, but with very few answers to show for it.
With Sandy, I would say, look how much he got out of him before he got hurt. So, I mean, he pitched a lot of innings before he got hurt, whereas with Yuri, who came up at a little earlier, but, not, I mean, what was Sandy, 22?
Yep.
I mean, he got hurt right away. Really only gave you not even half a year, I guess.
Yep.
So you got a lot more out of Sandy. One thing I wonder, and we have an international bent on this show, is the 3 most high-profile Japanese pitchers in the MLB, at least 3 of them are on this staff.
Yep.
All dealt with different kinds of injuries.
Sure.
I know Japanese pitchers have had shoulder injuries, maybe more so than American pitchers with a more elbow focus. Plus, they throw the splitter a lot, which on the elbow side, from what I understand, that's the old conventional wisdom, is that splitter does put a lot of pressure on your elbow. How much do you think, considering that all 3 of those pitchers have dealt with injuries and they're pretty important players on the team, how much do you think that factors in? Because can't be the Dodgers' fault. That's something that they kind of came with.
Yeah. The real answer is that I don't have an answer. I can guesstimate. I've read Jeff Passan's book, The Arm is Great, in terms of, like, educating yourself on the different injuries to the arm and the UCL. It spends a lot of time on the UCL. What's interesting about that is that we haven't made much progress in terms of Tommy John, like, bounce back, how long it takes you to come back from Tommy John. We've only bridged the gap on that only a little bit. Maybe that's because ligaments can only heal at a certain pace. But it feels like from when Tommy John was introduced to where we are now, we've only made marginal progress in terms of maybe a higher bounce back rate, but in terms of time spent away. And the answer that I have is I don't know. I've watched several talented, well-resourced, well-inclined organizations take a stab at connecting a certain arm action to injury, a certain lack of strength in certain places that leads to injury. I've watched an evaluation of the weighted ball era that we're in, and an attribution of weighted balls and new kind of more new age pitching philosophies of throwing high intensity into nets, weighted balls, different kind of lifting. I've seen those guys get hurt too. I've also seen the other end of the spectrum where guys spend a career not getting hurt by throwing a lot. Maybe there's something there in terms of volume. Like we're doing high intensity outputs without the same amount of volume in between that in a previous era of baseball, you're just throwing almost every day. And once every 5 days, 7 innings expected to go. So, like, maybe there's some correlation there. But I don't think there's an international correlation in terms of Japanese pitchers getting hurt at a higher clip with specific shoulder or elbow injuries enough to draw a conclusion with conviction about this is what's happening on the injury side of baseball. We're going through it right now as an industry with pitchers. We're not getting to see some of the best pitchers in the world because of these injuries. Right? Just to go back to another example, Sixto Sanchez, man. Sixto Sanchez, to me, is one of the strangest cases in all of baseball. It's definitely one of the strangest ones I've ever seen. If you go back to the 2020 playoffs and you watch his start against the Chicago Cubs, like you're like, okay, this is the best pitcher maybe in the world, maybe in the game right now. Pinpoint 70 grade command of elite level stuff, 99 to 101, can run it, can sink it, can cut it, nasty changeup, good breaking ball, good enough to get off barrels. There was nothing missing in the pitch package. He was 21 years old. And there was nothing in the history of the injury history, the assessment that said that there was anything problematic with the shoulder, right? And it would end up being a shoulder issue that sidelined him and ultimately derailed him from ever making a real comeback into baseball. It baffles me that Sixto Sanchez is like out of baseball relative to where his counterparts were in 2020, for example, when he first got into the big leagues.
Was the conditioning issue, I know we're getting off track, but was the conditioning issue with Sixto such that set him apart, or were there guys that had just as bad conditioning that had no problems? I think about Livan Hernandez, who had famous conditioning issues, and he pitched like how many years, right? Did Livan Hernandez pitch?
How often did they talk about this with David Wells, right? And like, there's guys that pitch through these things. I think that with Sixto Sanchez is entirely overblown. Could Sixto have come into certain camps in a little bit better shape? Yeah, a lot of players can say this, but to me, I don't see the direct correlation between the conditioning issues and him getting hurt from a shoulder, like structural shoulder issue. I'm sure I'll get some strength and conditioning guys and PTs that would argue different. But I was also up close to this one and felt like all we wanted was for Sixto Sanchez to be on the mound and healthy. There were times where Edward Cabrera's medical stuff felt more onerous or kind of just more like, intimidating than Sixto Sanchez's, right? And now look, it's flipped right now, right? And so we don't have this figured out, and when the shoulder gets involved, things get really hairy versus the elbow. I think the elbow, it's just kind of standard. You're going to miss time and it's not TJ, it's like a bridge or a brace in the elbow or a bone spur cleanup, things like that. Pitchers are due for them, it feels. We feel that's more part of the process. But when you start to see shoulder injuries pop up, that's where you start to get a little more concerned. But then again, there are guys who come back from shoulder injuries too. This is a black box, in my opinion.
Let's go back to the Dodgers here. So you talk about what they're known for, and I shout out to Tom Ferducci for these stats, but the defensive efficiency ranking, basically the outs they're converting, MLB rank, I'm just going from 2019, pre-pandemic, second, first, second, and now this year, 18th. So I'm not saying it's a one-to-one correlation with why they're struggling right now, but clearly that jumps out at you. When you're no lower than second since before the pandemic, 2 World Series ago, championships ago, and now here you are, 18th. That's a massive drop. So just in general, I wanted to ask about kind of the philosophy that you don't get to those numbers over that time just by having some good players there. There's a philosophy, right, that has to be there to get that consistency.
Super intentional. But
then it drops. So what philosophy, just talk about the philosophy the Dodgers had to do that, kind of your view on it, because there's trade-offs. You can't just say, yeah, we want to be elite at everything. You got to kind of pick certain edges, right? So obviously they chose that edge, the philosophy behind that, and then now it's dropped off, how it's impacted the Dodgers.
I don't have a direct answer here. I do know that the Dodgers have historically prioritized defensive players and well-rounded, it's like saying well-rounded offensive players. Maybe these guys don't need to be elite in their individual defensive production, but they can't be minuses. And therefore, in the aggregate, you have a lot of pluses on defense, even if they're not individually elite in the game. And they have had some of that. Mookie Betts has been an elite right fielder in the game. Miguel Rojas plays elite, defense at short. But that hasn't been fixed across the entire team. And yet they still come out in the rankings that you've said. We're top 5 in the league consistently defensively across the board. And all of a sudden they have a stumble and you look at their defensive efficiency and they're number 18. So it's funny because I spend so much time talking about bats and offense and run scoring, and you really still do. Like, again, we're talking about the Dodgers. They're still in the wild card, mostly because they've outslugged everybody.
Yeah, number 2 OPS team-wise in the league.
Correct. But what I think you have seen is in some critical positions, maybe third base and the corner outfield positions right now, where they've had those guys, whether it be Teoscar, Conforto, Muncy, like those guys are carrying like real negative defensive value, but they're all carrying, except for maybe Conforto, carrying significant offensive value to kind of countermeasure that. But defense gets more important the later you get into the season, and it gets even most important in the postseason. This is where I see a difference between last year's Dodgers and this year's Dodgers. They felt like a more elite defensive team last year, and they were able to through the course of those tough series that they played a lot of really good defense. Remember the Yankees and the Dodgers, that was a contrast that was being made in that World Series matchup.
Garrett Cole play.
Look how these guys play defense, and look how the Yankees played defense in this. Like, this is why the Dodgers are in a more advantageous position, even though the Yankees may have had a better lineup, player for player. Dodgers lineup was pretty good too. But that feels like an old adage. I'm not saying Andrew Friedman, yes, comes from the Tampa Bay Rays, but it's not that the Tampa Bay Rays copied and pasted processes into the Dodgers. I think they borrowed some of those things, and now it's just Dodgers processes. It's not Rays. But back to the Rays have always played a very defensively leaning style of baseball. So it stands to reason that that would be one of the borrowed, copied over processes.
Could we be seeing, because a lot of these names are familiar names, so it's not like we're talking about a whole new batch of players here. Mm-hmm. Aside from Andy Pages, who, he was on the team before, but is really coming to his own this year and cemented his spot. It doesn't seem like there's a big injection of youth into this team. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of these names, Will Smith, Muncy, Mookie Betts, these guys have been around a while. So could they just be getting older? I know it's 1 year to the next. You go from 2nd to 18th, but like, could some of that be just, hey, we're getting hit a little harder from a pitching standpoint, and now our guys are just a year older. We haven't really added that youthful exuberance on defense.
Maybe. I think that there's some real value in having a stability or consistency of a lineup with all those guys that you mentioned. Like, I think I'd rather have them penciled in than 0 to 1+ service time player that's, just getting his kind of feet wet, other than Pages, for example. And they've traded away guys like Miguel Vargas to... It's the trade-off. You only have 13 position player spots on a roster. Like, you can't just have... You either want to score runs or you want to also be the most athletically gifted team. Yes, I think there's something to these players now entering a year 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, where you just lose that lateral burst. But I think this one feels a little more connected to... They're just getting hit a little bit harder, and the emphasis and the focus is being placed on the defensive side of things. But I don't know. I watch them play and I don't see them like out of depth defensively. So I see the numbers here, but to me, it doesn't show up so often to where like the Dodgers are just hemorrhaging wins because of their defense. To me, they're still top dog in the National League, even with this current, and again, it's August 18th.
Yep.
We got to get through August, and then we got to get through September, and now you got to play a whole extra season. So that's where, to me, that's where the experience shows up. This is where young players now can give you that shot of adrenaline in this last push, but the players that have been in October before, that have been in late September before, I think that shows up, and I think that showed up last year with the Dodgers, for example.
And look, you got Otani now as a pitcher, so who knows, when you get to these playoff games, over the course of a season, you had these issues with overtaxed pen, the starter's not giving you enough, but they have guys that can take over games and really win it for you in the postseason. So that's going to be something to watch. But just to your last point before we move off the Dodgers, exit velocity allowed. 2022, their first from a pitching standpoint. Slipped to 8th, still very good in 23. 24, the year they won the World Series with all those injuries. They were 17th. Again, they were missing a lot of guys throughout that regular season. Now 24, tied with the Rockies. So I wonder just if that defense, those defensive stats are not necessarily in a vacuum, that, the harder you're getting hit, maybe you try to take some of that into account, but who knows how accurate some of those stats are. But certainly going to be a team to watch, a lot of fun. Padres, which, we're not going to talk about the whole team, but you have to talk about the Padres as you talk about the Dodgers, because it is the best rivalry, I think, in baseball right now, even more than the Yankees and the Red Sox. I know
I agree.
You're wearing the shirt. It's hard to, but just, it feels nasty. The excitement level of the players, it's just fun to watch. It's amazing when you look at what the Padres have lost. When you say they gained and lost Soto, obviously, basically the core of the Washington Nationals was there.
Yep.
We'll see some of their prospect losses down the road, but we know what they just traded for as far as DeVries, and then Robbie Snelling is quickly emerging. I'm a Marlins fan. I'm biased. He's quickly emerging as one of the best left-handed prospects in baseball. Tanner Scott's not on the team anymore. Right. I mean, they really lost a lot of guys, both prospect-wise and then guys that they got.
Padre too?
That was the Arias trade. So, he's obviously panning out pretty well for the Miami Marlins right now. But they've lost guys from the system, and they lost guys that they acquired, or they got them for short term. It didn't work, and now they're back to square one. But even with all those, I'm not questioning the process on them, but just things that didn't turn out the way they planned them to turn out. They're still right there as one of the best teams in baseball and going toe-to-toe with the Dodgers. So what is it about the Padres that's allowing them to keep pace in this situation while having some pretty bad misses?
Good players, like an ability to identify and kind of have good players play well in your organization while they're there. I think the Padres have gone through, understandably, like kind of peaks and valleys to this process, but for the most part, the one thing that's been wildly consistent with the Padres is that they're going to be aggressive in turning over their roster. A lot of trades. They make a ton of trades. And you can still net out on the better side of this, even if there's some really talented players going out the door. You have to give to get to make trades. It's not, we don't live in this world, like the other 29 GMs are smart too. You're not just going to fleece everybody. So you have to give value, and sometimes you have to give more. Sometimes you have to be comfortable watching James Wood walk out the door because you're trying to get Juan Soto. Yeah, like on the other side of it, you can make your judgment on it, but you can't say that their front office doesn't act very aggressively with the window that they're in, with the young, controllable players that they have. They extend players. They make a lot of trades. They draft very well. They just do a lot of things well on the player personnel side of things and the player identification side of things that helps their general manager make a lot of deals. So they just have a lot of currency, kind of. And I don't like to think of players as just like assets or currency, but they stack a lot of good players and they package them together to make trades for more right now major league needs. So they do have the current window currently grasped in their focus. They don't seem like the team that's trying to play it for 3 to 5 years, but they're also extending Machado, they're extending Tatis, they're signing Bogarts to a huge free agency deal, and those have worked to varying degrees. But also, one thing that really stands out about the Padres is Manny Machado. Like, you talk about one consistent theme throughout this whole era of Padres baseball, it's legend of Dade, Manny Machado, right? Yep. Like this. He's just been remarkably consistent. He's come up a lot in the Twitter sphere. You know, is he in the Harper and Trout category of like guys that he traveled with, like, and his staying power in the game right now?
Yeah, games played. I'd be curious to stack those three.
Talk about
up
a guy
next to
that
each
posts.
other.
We've talked about this before, but I have also heard from enough teammates of his now to talk about what he represents in terms of not only showing by example and posting, but also just as a guy you can win ball games with. Definitely a guy with an edge, right? So it's not a guy without his I don't want to say controversy. I do think players have to have an edge, right? Like the right players have that, just like killer instinct is overly used, and it's not exactly that, but it's some version of that. And I think he's just been providing significant value on both sides of the ball for a long time and provided remarkable consistency for them that allows, I don't know, you always have your dude in the middle of the lineup there and in the middle of your clubhouse. That's been remarkably consistent for them. So shout out to them for selecting that player to kind of grow their team around.
I just pulled it up just to see with those 3 games played, and both of them, you know, they're very similar. Manny made his debut at 19 in 2012. Trout, 2011 as a 19-year-old. Bryce Harper, 2012 as a 19-year-old. First of all, incredible. They all debuted as teenagers. I mean, just shows you the talent level of this cohort. But really, they're all the same age, give or take. And then I looked at games played. Manny, 1859. Mike Trout, who was the first one to debut a year earlier than everybody else, 1614. Bryce Harper, 1749. So basically an entire season for Manny Machado. Same age as Harper, a year younger in terms of debut, at least a year earlier, I should say. Trout debuted. So it's amazing to see just the consistency of posting and then performance. It's just been, he's in that conversation. I think it's a fair conversation. He's got more WAR. I know it's not end all be all, but just looking at pulling these up, he's got significantly more WAR than Bryce Harper right now, about almost 10 more. Mike Trout was such a machine. I mean, first in the league for 5 straight years, but he's catching up.
We're sleeping on Mike Trout. Like it's not, that's the fact that these 3 guys are bunched together just shows you like it is possible to have remarkable impact across a long space of time and still be, in Machado's case today, right now, as relevant to that San Diego Padres team as any other player on that roster, maybe short of Tatis. Tatis is just a monster too.
Right.
So like Tatis deserves his credit and all this. But yeah, I think if you are the Dodgers, you're definitely looking at the Padres as like, and it was the case last year too, where their hardest series was the Padres. I felt like once you get to the other side of beating the Padres, you feel like you could beat any club in baseball. And it came down to like an out, 2 outs at the end of it. So, yeah, the Padres they're here, and they're here for a little while, with some really elite performers, and they were really active at the deadline. Their deadline acquisitions have moved the needle for them. Like their holes have been shored up with their deadline acquisition. That's really all you can ask for. And I think on the other side of it, with the Dodgers, it's kind of like a semi-disappointing deadline. If you just look at, Brock Stewart, I think, is the which has one of the better four-seamers in all of baseball. So it seemed like a very smart upside play for the Dodgers. He's probably going to be really good for the Dodgers as well. I think he's hurt right now. But that was kind of the extent of their deadline, even though they added James Tibbs and Dustin May, like in the Dustin May deal with the Red Sox, who looks great as a Red Sox so far. But I think the Padres on the other side of that, they were very aggressive at the deadline in attacking their needs and had the trade assets to make it happen. So it's kind of hard to decide which is more favorable. That's why I think it's the National League is where it's at. I think the winner of this matchup right here, the Dodgers-Padres, is the one we're going to see in the World Series.
Yeah, well, the National League, I'm going to attendance because with these two teams, my brain goes to that Dodgers who we're talking about today. Number one in attendance by almost 7,000, over 7,000. So, I mean, obviously they're
incredible,
top dog. But then you got the Yankees, and right behind them, San Diego, 42,000 plus per game. Obviously, the weather has something to do with it, but I don't think you can limit it to that. National League in general, Phillies, Mets, Cubs, Braves. In a bad season, the Braves, and then, of course, San Francisco. So a lot of juice in the National League just overall.
Have you been to San Diego for a baseball game?
No.
Okay, so I was there for Dodgers, Padres, NLCS, or it was NLDS. I think it was 2022.
Nick Martinez
Went to go see a good friend pitch, and he pitched his ass off in that series. But that place is electric, and it's one of those. San Diego's a beautiful city, but the stadium is also right in there downtown, so it's a very pedestrian-friendly stadium, and the whole city activates. The whole downtown area activates for these events, and it gets loud, man. It's electric atmosphere, and they would go on to beat the Dodgers in that series, and the celebration was crazy. It was that doesn't surprise me where they sit in attendance, and they especially do that in the postseason. It's a difficult place to play for opposing teams in San Diego, so they have that going for them.
A lot of factors with that, but part of what you said, as far as just kind of always going for it, even when it doesn't work.
Yep.
To me, when you're obviously, I'm a team fan of the Marlins who make a lot of transactions, but oftentimes it's not to go for it. So just regardless of results, that attitude, I think, affects the attendance in a way. Everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction and trying to win. It just adds some energy to the organization. I mean, look at the Rays have had just as much, probably more success than the Padres have the last decade, and their attendance hasn't really moved. So it's just that you talk about all the time, just that feeling of, hey, you're showing the public that this is about more than just the immediate bottom line. It's about pushing this thing forward. And San Diego clearly, right or wrong, they're swinging to get something and make something happen.
For sure. And their ownership group deserves credit too. Like the general managers don't make decisions uniformly or unilaterally without, especially high dollar decisions like a lot of the ones that we're talking about here. You don't make those decisions without going vertically to ownership, and ownership has to have that buy-in. I feel like they're run like the public trust of San Diego. I think they're also San Diego's only professional team right now.
Yep.
So like those chips are into this franchise, but you got to have that buy-in from the ownership group in order to operate this way. And I think ownership is responding to the high attendance, the revenue, and they're relevant in the game right now. And they should be. They're playing tremendous baseball. They have a great stadium, and they have a great fan base. So
that's where you would take a casual or non-baseball fan, a game in either stadium of that series. I think that's where you want to be. Playoffs, forget about it. So Switching gears to the American League and someone you know well. Obviously, you're wearing the outfit, so you knew who we're going to talk about here. That is Garrett Crochet, the highest WAR of any pitcher in baseball right now. The size, the velocity. Interesting on the pitch profile. We're going to get into a story just about Garrett Crochet and your experience with him on the draft. But just the player himself. And I wanted to ask you about this before we get into some of the background, because this was interesting to me. Use the fastball, the four-seamer probably better and more often than anybody in the game as far as a starting pitcher. Boston, what you hear coming out of there, and you would know better than me, I know this is after your time, but you hear that they are completely de-emphasizing the fastball relative to other clubs and are using the fastball as a staff, as an organization, less than any other organization in baseball. More sinker for Garrett Crochet, four-seam still is bread and butter. Just the idea that you have a player who's already elite when you get him and you try to change him. I mean, it's interesting to be able to do that, number one, and then have success with that player who understandably is going to have a lot of faith in what he can do before he even gets to you.
Yeah. And just to comment on the sweatshirt, I've decided I'm only going to wear things that come out of my closet. I've worked for the Red Sox and I've worked for the Marlins, so these are things that I got picked up along the way. So I'm going to limit the things I wear to these two organizations. But what stands out to me, I think the diminishment or decreased fastball usage for the Boston Red Sox, I think that's coincidental in terms of them just a deference to using your best pitches more. A lot of guys' best pitches aren't the fastball. Mm-hmm. Sometimes guys' best pitch is a good breaking ball, a really good changeup, a really good off speed or a cutter, right? And there's also different fastballs now that don't get categorized. Like a cutter is a cut fastball for the most part, and that doesn't get categorized as a fastball. So they have a lot of cutter usage and a lot of cutter guys. But I think that this is a newer way of thinking about pitching. It's just leverage your best pitch the most. If your best pitch is your slider, why would you be throwing 70% fastballs? There's another side to that to me, and I think that there's an injury connection here. There's a different emphasis on the baseball when you're ripping a ton of sliders, relative to a lot of fastballs. It feels to me that the fastball is a little just easier on the arm overall, despite the higher velocity. Some breaking balls you really have to manipulate and do different things to make them move. Splitters and changeups to a certain extent as well. But I think also guys throw a lot of fastballs. It's easier to throw more fastballs because it's an easier pitch to throw a strike with. It's kind of a hard thing to do to throw a breaking ball for a strike consistently. You just watch it. It just has a shape. You have to it's kind of like bowling, either throwing the ball straight or curving it. It's the guys that can do it really well. But for the most part, you want to throw something straight to a spot to establish strike one at least. It's not that many guys that could just pitch completely backwards in 0-0 counts, just breaking ball strike. And so I don't know what to make of it. I think it seems really important for players to pitch with their fastball still. And I think, ironically, Garrett Crochet is a high four-seamer usage. But I think it's also it's a high secondary usage as well, but it is identified as his best pitch. So I think he gets to use it a lot. If you are a pitcher with a different arsenal and your four-seamer doesn't lead your profile, should you be throwing it 75% of the time, 80% of the time? Maybe to establish command and strike. You can't not use your fastball. And that's not what the Red Sox are doing. They're just using their overall fastball percentages are down, but I think that's more a reflection of the makeup of their pitching staff overall. And the fact that they do lean into newer ways of doing things, newer usage distributions that may be more friendly to leveraging your better secondary pitches. And so that may be a little more of a newer school way of thinking, but Garrett Crochet kind of flies in the face of that a little bit with high four-seam usage. But you see why. It's probably one of the better four-seamers in the entire game. It's funky. It's coming from the left side. It's just, he's a beast, man. He's an exceptionally talented young man, and I think it was really sharp and smart to extend him when they did. They went out and put together an aggressive package to acquire him. And this is best case scenario for the Red Sox right now in this pocket of time, for him to be the best pitcher, according to WAR, in the game. And in no small part a reason that they're squarely in a playoff seat right now, where there were times in the season where we weren't talking with that kind of conviction about where they were going to end up.
Pulling up his college scouting report, because I know you had some eyes on him when you were with the Miami Marlins.
Virtual eyes. Yeah.
Virtual eyes. This is a COVID year that he was coming out. This is draft eligible year. Here's the Baseball America scouting report. I'll just summarize some of it here. 6'6", 218-pound southpaw, which is big boy, but he's gotten bigger since then, right? He's like in that 240 range now, 250. Fastball rating 96 to 100, plus breaking ball. Best overall stuff. This is, again, what the report was at the time. Arguably the best overall stuff in the 2020 class. Definitely the best stuff of any left-hander. But the abbreviated 2020 season hurt Crochet because he doesn't have the track record of starting that other college pitchers do, and because he split time between starter and reliever. So now he's stepping into a full-time starting role. One start's delayed because of shoulder soreness. 3.5 innings, 6 strikeouts, or 3.1 innings, 6 strikeouts. Season's done. And now you got to draft based on that track record. 11th pick, clearly a high pick, but he was not one of the first, second, third pitchers selected. You saw Max Meyer, who ultimately went to the Marlins. Asa Lacy, who I couldn't believe it, out of baseball already. Unbelievable. And
I looked it up. Not out of baseball. He just had Tommy John in 2024.
So that's why he was out.
He's coming back, but it's been a rough go for Asa Lacy.
So he's got an uphill battle. Then you get Reed Detmers to the Angels, who's a solid player. And then Crochet, a whole nother level from all these guys.
Emerson Hancock
Yep.
is also selected before Crochet in that draft.
Number 11. So taking it back to 2020, first of all, just the weirdness of doing this. And you're an international guy. Were you already international at that time, or were you baseball ops?
I was director of baseball operations during the 2020 draft.
Got it. So you were on the international side yet, but just in general, I mean, what was your responsibilities for dealing with this COVID craziness and making sure that you guys had what you needed, right? Because that kind of falls under your jurisdiction to an extent, making sure that you guys had what you need to get through this ever-changing landscape of the draft in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, to be clear, the amateur scouting director and there were those that were much more, the amateur scouting and the draft was much more squarely in their wheelhouse. As a director of baseball operations, that title was a little more major league club and player personnel, pro player personnel acquisition. The way it was, different clubs, different roles mean different clubs, different things to different clubs. In that moment, it was general baseball operations connection, but the draft wasn't my draft room. It wasn't like I was a member of the general discussions for that draft. But in that draft, you got to barely scout anybody at all. It was the COVID year. Yeah. So it was your visibility into players was simply the video, the data, and what you could scrap together from a limited overall scouting process. And it was a 5-round draft.
Before you even get forward, I want to ask that because I want to stop you there. Don't forget where you were going. But who's in charge of making sure, like you said, scrapping together? Like who gets all this? Is that from the amateur scouting department, just kind of piecing all this stuff together? Like how, like just the organization. I'm talking about the verb, like organizing things during the pandemic to get ready for the draft. Is that all done through amateur scouting? Like how does that whole piece come together when the typical things you do, you cannot do? Like who organizes all that?
The amateur scouting department. So within a baseball operations structure, we've talked about this before, a scouting department isn't one department. A scouting department is actually 4 departments, really. You have an international amateur, traditional Latin American 16-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid signing. You have amateur domestic. So you have 2 amateur scouting departments. One is international and one is domestic. That's the draft. That's the one I'm talking about that is responsible for what you're talking about. But you also have professional scouting, so you're scouting the other professional teams. And then you have major league scouting, that's more of or advanced scouting. That's more major league game focused scouting. So to answer your question, who sets up for the draft? The amateur domestic scouting department. And those in that department, the draft, that's your Super Bowl, right? That's your organization point. And that's, for organizations, that's where you get the bulk of your players. 70% of your players, I think, are acquired through, even in aggressive Latin American signing teams, still the draft still makes up 60 to 70% of your total player pool. So it's your most important player injection, talent injection window. And traditionally the scouting director, the amateur scouting director, and his lieutenants, they're national cross-checkers, regional supervisors, assistant directors or coordinators, kind of like people lower in the structure than the scouting director, are all doing things collectively to make sure that you're organized. Back end, front end, analytics department is squarely braided in all of these processes for pretty much every team. But the amateur draft is a beast of different departments coming together, but being steered and being led by the amateur scouting director and the amateur scouting department.
The high school kids in that class, before we get to college kids like Crochet, there's a question from Kane's Cat. He threw a 5 asking, question about the COVID draft. What was your mindset and the organization's mindset on high school kids in 2020 with only 20 rounds? He pointed out that Miami was able to benefit from that. The Hurricanes, which, I mean, you look at the guys they had. Alejandro Rosario was one of the top right-handed pitching prospects in baseball, had Tommy John, but he's still going to be a guy. Yo-Yo Morales, who seems to be knocking on the door of the majors. Victor Medeiros, who transferred, but another pro player. CJ Kafis already in the big leagues. It's amazing when you just look at this list. Don Patelli, another guy who got drafted pretty high. So obviously they benefited. I'm assuming a lot of high school kids kind of slipped through the cracks during this process. What was you guys drafted a college kid here, is right, with Max Meyer.
Yep, that was the Max Meyer draft.
But just the overall approach to high school players in 2020.
2020 was the riskiest year to be taking players overall because your processes were just limited, right? Like unless you got a lot of process in before the basically everybody shut down, which is the bulk of a high school season. I think we shut down in March, the bulk of March, April, May. So like everything got shut down. So high school players being inherently more risk-laden than college players. I think that there was a little more, I don't know if I have the numbers to back this up, but it felt in the room there was a little bit less appetite for a less visible process, which was what the high school ranks were. I think my favorite player in that draft was a kid by the name of Austin Hendrick. At the Reds, I think the Reds would take him, at pick 12 right after Crochet. And I loved that swing. It looked like it was a pretty swing with power. But I remember there being some concerns about how he saw the baseball, right? But it was harder to reach for a player like that. I don't think he was ever in the Marlins periphery for that pick. And I think in large part because there are other quote unquote high upside guys that also have a high floor, and they have a process with an established Division I collegiate team. And so it just felt harder to take that player, at least what the Marlins were picking at 3 that year. So, and especially at pick number 3, that felt more difficult. But I think you're going to see, like in any process, if you all of a sudden have 20 rounds in a previous draft, and this one was 5 rounds, it's going to be 15 rounds of players that fall through the cracks. So that to me is, college programs, I see the question now. I see how college programs benefited from guys just kind of getting lost, during the COVID year. And I think we see it show up a lot in the transfer portal too. And now in year 2025, like something happened in their timeline in 2020 where they were under-scouted, ended up at a certain school, and then, this string of guys from Wake Forest that were all transfer guys that would be impacted by this exact thing and kind of getting lost in the shuffle of this. So,
so just going through 2020 again, because you mentioned the high school versus the college. Max Meyer, which is it's an interesting quote here as I read. There he is. As I read DJ Svihilik's, I might be butchering the names, discussion of why you pick Max Meyer number 1. His first sentence, it was a comfortable selection of Max Meyer. First words, comfortable selection. College player, University of Minnesota. He already performed at a pretty high level. He had performed at USA Baseball. He was on the smaller side, but you had a lot of information on him from what he had done at the USA Baseball and the Big Ten. Made it to the majors. We'll see kind of what we talked about last segment about the pitch quality. His fastball's one of the poorer ones right now in baseball. His slider's one of the best. How do you use him? But anyways, he's in the big leagues. But again, it's interesting. Comfortable selection is the words used by DJ to kind of go to your point about, wanting to feel comfortable and secure in what you're doing as opposed to taking a risk. Second round pick that year was Dax Fulton, who still working his way through the minors, had some injuries. Kyle Nicholas, college player. I don't believe he's still with the organization. Jake Eater, another college player, traded for Jake Berger, which ended up helping a playoff run. So that pick worked out. Zach McCambley is a reliever. I think he has a chance potentially here. And then Kyle Hurd, who was traded, but I believe he's in the big league, or he's already been into the big league. So
Nicholas was also used in a trade as well.
Okay.
Yeah, with the Pirates.
So, kind of a mixed bag. We'll see what Max Meyer ends up doing.
It felt like a comfortable selection at the time. I think that there was a lot of group consensus. There were some players that were really interesting stacked next to each other. I mean, we talked about Mick Abel quite a bit. There were guys in the room that liked Mick Abel as well. There was arguments for Asa Lacy. But I think we were really excited to select Max Meyer. That slider, you could see that playing at a high level, and it does.
He tore through the minors.
It plays at a high level. It tore through the minors, got there very fast. We haven't seen what Max Meyer is yet. We haven't seen the ceiling of Max Meyer. I think it's an easy, this makes sense as a reliever, and maybe it does. Maybe that fastball, enough velocity with command and a nasty 70-grade slider, that's going to play. He's shown some bursts here, I think, early this season.
14 strikeouts, I believe, earlier this year in one game.
So he's a bat misser, right, and a bulldog competitor. He was a hockey player. That term came up a lot out of University of Minnesota. Just from a toughness standpoint, there was some, because while he was kind of a more medium frame guy, the arguments were made that he was also really strong due to this hockey playing background. And there was a lot of excitement in Max Meyer, and he was a polished college player as well with some Team USA experience. So I don't think you're ever comfortable, but there were a lot of things. He had a lot of things going for him for you straight face make that pick. And then what people don't know about the Max Meyer thing, Max Meyer would be subsequently asked about in deals at the highest of levels in the following years after that as well. He wasn't moved because we also believed in the upside, but Max Meyer could have accessed some really interesting things as well earlier in his prospect journey. Now that's taken a little bit of a regression, but he's still young enough where we're still gonna see a lot of Max Meyer. But yeah, to the comfortable selection, that feels appropriate. That feels right based on what I was reading from the room. You were excited to select that player, even though Crochet would end up, being what he is now. Picks later.
Let me ask you this, because it's a transition back to Crochet, who I know you were a big fan of, as you'll get to his sort of your view of him, even though he did have the limited compared to Meyer. So Meyer, you're looking at
starter risk or reliever risk.
I guess on both you had reliever risk, right?
You did. Yeah.
With Meyer, it was more about the body.
Yep.
With Crochet, he just hadn't been a starter and had thrown strikes consistently at that level that you could say comfortably this is what he's going to do. So kind of different, totally different. Two college players, but totally different weaknesses, let's say.
And Tennessee wasn't what they are now then. That's another important thing. I think Tennessee has taken huge leaps in terms of pitching development, where you're seeing Liam Hicks or Liam Doyle,
who reminds me a little bit of Crochet.
But imagine if Crochet was a little further along development-wise, because it really was development that we're talking about here. I think we would have seen him, in today's Tennessee Vols program, Crochet at that same standpoint in time would go top 3, top 4 picks.
Let me ask you philosophically, and you liked Crochet, so this is not Monday morning quarterback, and this was one of your guys you identified. But I want to ask you, when you look at some of the pitchers that are really excelling in the league right now, major leagues, Christopher Sanchez, big guy, Paul Skeens, huge, Skubal, huge, Crochet, huge, Zach Wheeler, huge. There are some exceptions to what I'm saying here, but these are big dudes. These are big dudes. Crochet obviously was big as anybody. Yuri Perez is not even on this list, but he's as a young guy we both think is going to be in that elite conversation for a while. Ohtani, when he does pitch, a lot of people think, I saw John Smoltz and Jake Peavy think that he's the best pitcher in baseball from a start-to-start standpoint when he's pitching. All big guys. Max Meyer, not as big. Crochet, you had that strength. Just putting the two together, understanding the process that led you to Max Meyer was sound, and Max Meyer, he reached the majors and still has his career ahead of him. I don't know. Do you go back and look at that size conversation, kind of revisit in your head? Because considering Meyer's out with a hip injury, which to me is kind of like that seems like a wear and tear injury more than like a fluky elbow kind of deal.
I'm going to quote somebody who I respect a lot, Stan Meek, longtime scouting director, signed a lot of really good, talented, high WAR, Major League WAR players.
Jose Fernandez, pretty good one under his watch.
Pitching guy, pitching specialist himself. He always said, buy it by the pound, and buy pitching by the pound. And I think that there was just there's something about big physical guys being able to carry intense, high volume workloads that maybe it seems like an obvious thing, but there are other guys, smaller guys, that kind of throw that into a funk. The Walker Buehlers, and like there's some really like medium framed athletic guys that are also very good. I also think in this era of four-seam ride, right? We talk about ride numbers a lot, but we don't talk about release height numbers a lot, right? And like Max Meyer seemed like a kind of like a lower release height, vertical attack fastball with a wipeout slider. So I think there's been a little more of a tolerance for that medium frame pitcher because of their approach and release angles, especially if they're a little more like low three quarters. Big ride from a low release, that means swing and miss in the zone. Like that we know as an industry overall. And so taller guys, to me, can still do that, but they have to kind of, like taller guys that iron mic it, that's not a traditionally efficient like fastball plane right now. Taller guys that can kind of get on top of the fastball from a slightly lower slot, that's premium. And I think that's what we're seeing with all those names that we talked about. So I remember that being the argument at the time with Max Meyer, like, okay, it's not a very tall pitcher, but the approach angle works as well with the fastball, with velocity to the fastball, which is what he had as well. What I didn't get, I didn't think his fastball would play at a below average level. I thought the pure characteristics would be higher. And I think, and I don't think that that's panned out at the big leagues. That projection of the fastball qualities has not allowed him to have that sustained impact. Whereas Crochet, really good fastball qualities and like an elite approach angle. What I liked about Crochet in the draft, it's not a player I identified. It's a player that from my time in Boston, watching Chris Sale have the success that he had, and then guys getting knocked because he had a little bit of a funky arm. He still does. It's not a traditional arm action. It's like a high elbow lead. It's not as funky as Chris Sale, but he would get grouped into that bucket, right? And I remember that being an asset for Chris Sale, that funky delivery, repeatable, like it was a different look, but it was repeatable. And it's nasty for left-handed hitters in particular, and to back foot right-handers with sliders. It looks like it's coming from like the first base dugout. I veered off from answering your question on the physicality because I think quality pitching can come from medium frames, but I think the durability components feel like they're in favor of the bigger, more physical pitcher. But even guys like Sandy get hurt, you know? So there's, again, back to this thing that we don't have this figured out. I would buy it by the pound and lean on the side of physicality, but I think there are spots where, you know, the medium frame guy, not the biggest guy, can still really impact you on the mound. So yeah, I think I skirted around answering your question.
No, I mean, you did. No, you answered it. And it just, again, this was what I was planning to talk about, but when we started really comparing Meyer and Crochet, I just pulled up not knowing what was going to be there, I pulled up the WAR leaders. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned some of them, but if you really go down the whole line, Sanchez, Skeens, Skubal, Andrew Abbott is the one smaller guy, Wheeler, Joe Ryan, average size, Hunter Brown, big, Garrett Crochet, huge, Framber Valdez, not the tallest, but big, Lodolo, big, Eovaldi, big, Pivetta, big, Trevor Rogers, big, Freddie Peralta, I guess more average, Drew Rasmussen's pretty thick. That's the top 15 in WAR. I mean, I didn't leave anybody out. So
it looks a lot like that on the hitter side too. So I think overall, strong is good. Stronger is better. There are exceptions.
Yep.
And the exceptions kind of throw you off because you don't know what to make of them at times. You don't know what to do with the fact that Mookie Betts in certain years has elite impact offensively. So those guys make you question. Or I remember this Dustin Pedroia would have thrown off a lot of subsequent scouting processes after that, hunting for Dustin Pedroia. This was
Altuve.
Every kid. The Altuve one is funny as hell because every kid that was now 5'6" or shorter that you'd see at a tryout that was a scrappy player would get grouped. It's like, well, he could be Altuve. And maybe he could. Altuve signed for $15,000. Like, so there are these outliers that throw it off, but that's what to me, that's what makes baseball romantic. You know, like that's what makes you get excited about baseball. Just when you think you have it figured out, let's just get everybody big and strong. Yeah, but you'll miss Corbin Carroll doing it that way. You know what I mean? So it cuts in both directions enough, but I think I'd still lean on the side of bigger physical because the numbers and the Hall of Fame bears that out, for example. Like, this is full of big, strong dudes. And then an everyday lived experience in a major league clubhouse or on a major league game would show you that physicality is still king. Most guys are still really big and strong.
Let me ask you this, and I shouldn't even, we're talking about the home of Pedro Martinez, as we talk about smaller versus bigger pitchers, but you lived through this, both as a college player playing in the Northeast and then, with the Red Sox. As you get into the deep postseason, which you experienced 2 deep postseason runs with the Red Sox.
Yep.
I know in, for example, football terms, is it purposeful targeting bigger, let's say quarterbacks, the throwing athlete on the roster? You want bigger, stronger quarterbacks if you're a Northeast team that plays outside, just because when you get to that playoff time later in the season, in those conditions, it just works better. Is there any of that in baseball for a team like Boston that wants to play into October where the conditions are different than they are, for example, here in Miami in a dome? And when you got to get a Crochet, is there anything to that physicality later in the year, or is that more of a football thing that doesn't translate exactly to baseball?
I think that there are too many things to already consider to also need for the weather component to be present as well. And then that takes off all of Latin America, first of all. So it doesn't, that already seems problematic for me, given the Latin composure.
Well, just the size, the body type.
So you're just talking about body. Yeah.
So, like, for example,
okay, so
I'll give you
no weather
Buffalo
correlation.
So when
there.
Buffalo drafted Josh Allen, for example, who had a lot of red flags not red flags personal, but that's some game red flags, the equivalent of poor command, right, for baseball terms, coming out of Wyoming. One of the reasons Buffalo picked Josh Allen was because you need a cold weather quarterback for those late games to cut through the wind, to be able to just be durable in the colder conditions in a way that maybe like a Drew Brees, you put him in a dome.
And cold weather is tied directly to physicality?
In football for the throwing athletes.
Got it. Okay.
Because it's not just about the September games, it's about the October, November, January. Obviously, you don't have those games in baseball, but you do have October if you're playing well for the Boston Red Sox. So I'm visualizing this guy pitching in October with everybody in the crowd wearing sweaters and just cutting that figure, and I think of a Josh Allen for Buffalo kind of doing that thing.
Interesting. I think I agree. I think this we're still on Crochet, so it looks like he's looked like he's well positioned to handle a postseason push in the Northeast. But I guess my answer is still the same. We're like, there's too many other things you have to get right first before considering this. But if you just philosophically, big picture, in a binary way, believe in strength overall, then you still net out at the same place. But I don't think it's for cold weather reasons at all.
Gotcha. So let's move on here to another player who's going to be playing in the Northeast, and that is Samuel Basallo, catcher, left-hander, 21 years old, completely dominated the minor leagues, most recently AAA, maybe the best hitter at the minor league level. Of course, he plays the same position as what we thought was the franchise player of the Baltimore Orioles, Adley Rutschman. We'll get to that in a second. Catcher, DH, first base. He's had time at all three, so they're going to find a way to get this guy on the field because of the bat. We'll get into some of the position implications later, but he's up. He almost had a home run in his debut. Jesus Sanchez, our old friend, came in and grabbed that one.
Jesus got him.
But what do you see with this player? Let's start with the bat because that's the star of the show.
I think this is you don't sneak your way into top prospect in baseball status. And I think Samuel Basallo has been on a upward trajectory as a prospect almost the entire time, which you don't always see. It's kind of like at every level, he's just gotten better and better and better and better. The pool of Dominican catchers is kind of limited overall. So it's a bit of like a stereotype that I think is good that it's being proven wrong with guys like Agustin Ramirez. Like that, I think it's shifted a little bit. But I remember thinking that like you don't too often see too many catchers come out of the Dominican sign out of the Dominican.
Was Sanchez the last impact guy?
Gary Sanchez?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I'm going to be missing somebody here, but yeah, there aren't that many of them. So it's like one of those, I don't think it's true, but it has some history behind, like, there just aren't that many of them for you to have player comps of. And I remember that feeling like, oh man, the Orioles signed, left-handed swinging catcher out of the Dominican for a good chunk of money. But then you watch 2-3 swings of his, and you're like, oh, I get it. Like, it's, even if he moves off the position, which was always part of the discussion with this player, which is why I think, like, you don't have to worry about that. Even if you have Rushman, yes, only one person can catch, but also it's the most time-shared position of all the positions. You can really have 2 guys split 60-40 time with the other one DHing, and you get 2 full-time players out of that role. And I think he's playing a little first base now, a little more first base now too, to open up his
6'4".
his ABs. But he's a big physical kid with a really advanced hit tool, really sweet left-handed swing, and for power. I think he was all of his. If you look at his Baseball Savant on the minor league side, Baseball Savant doesn't have a minor league side, but there's some Twitter accounts that simulate it. All the bar graphs are to the right, and basically in the 100th percentile during his time in AAA. And for them, it's Norfolk, which is not an easy place to hit. So those are, sometimes you look at the Pacific Coast League, for example. You look at some numbers out of the Pacific Coast League, and you're like, okay, yeah. And then you ask guys there, it's like, yeah, it's like playing on the moon. But he's been like, he's putting up those power numbers in leagues that aren't as easy to hit in, and he shows up right to the big leagues, and he looks like he belongs. That looks really, really right. So I think the Orioles have an elite offensive player for a good chunk of time here, and I think the Orioles will be back. They have too many talented core position players with really good swings and with really good histories of performance through the minor leagues and in the major leagues that I don't think we're going to see the lull of the Orioles for very long. I think they'll be squarely back into contention for this thing moving forward. But it's hard not to like what you see out of Samuel Basallo. I think I love collecting these books here because they're just good time stamps. Things get memorialized, and this is the 2023 Baseball America Prospect Handbook that gets distributed right before each Major League season. So this would have been March of 2023. And Samuel Basallo is the number 15th ranked prospect. A bunch of names ahead of him here that would have never gone on to be number 1 overall prospects in baseball. Like, it's a really hard thing to accomplish, to become a top prospect in all of baseball. But this said that there were 14 guys with more value ahead of him, like, overall. Now, he was young. He had just played in the complex league, but hit 278 with 6 homers, 350 on base, 424 slug.
How old is he when that was?
This must have been, he would have been in his age 17 season.
Wow. In
2022. So if you did batting average only, he would just kind of get lost in the shuffle. And even if you did a total slash line, but if you combined a 17-year-old producing in the Florida Complex League with some home runs, really hard to hit home runs there. So the fact that he hit 6 is actually a good amount of homers in that league. There are a lot of really interesting value points for Samuel Basallo, but the point is he was ranked their 15th best prospect at that point in time, right? And you fast forward just 2.5, 3 years later, one of the best prospects in all of baseball. I love going through those exercises because nobody has this all figured out. Because if that was true, then they could have traded him for anything. Theoretically, if a team had the assessment of him being a number 1 prospect in all of baseball, they could have traded for him when he was internally ranked or publicly ranked their 15th best prospect. That's why I think the professional scouting of the lowest levels of the minor leagues is where that last margin is. Those scouts that can identify the player before he's the player, and he's playing baseball, but just in rookie ball, complex ball. I think that's where a lot of impact can be made, and some really good pro scouts make their hay, and some good general managers. The Padres identified Fernando Tatis as a player that they wanted out of the Dominican Summer League, or before he even played in the Dominican Summer League, right? I'm saying the same thing could have happened with Basallo if you were watching him at that point in time. But even then, publications had 14 players ranked ahead of him. Now he's number 1. So
What a system. Because some of those guys you see ahead of him, it's not like those guys you look at and say, oh, wow, how could they have this guy? Those are guys in the major leagues, some of them on the all-star team.
Gunnar Henderson, Grayson Rodriguez, Jackson Holliday, Colton Cowser, DL Hall, Jordan Westberg, Connor Norby, Marlins, Cal Stowers, number 9 with the Marlins, Kobe Mayo, Dylan Beavers, Heston Kierstad, Cade Povich, Judd Fabian, all ranked ahead of.
Which
Samuel
Beavers
Basallo.
is up too, I think.
Beavers is up too.
So, I mean.
Really good. This was a really good system. And I think that they would have held tight at this point in time because they weren't yet good at the major league level in 2023. So I think they could have held tight to their prospects as opposed to needing to deal some of their best prospects when they're in your winning window. Basallo ranked at 15 in your system is maybe a little more tradable if you're winning games and you're in the postseason push. All of a sudden, like, okay, maybe I could trade somebody that's in between numbers 10 and 15 in my system. So, yeah, interesting to get here, but overall, good to see Latin American players graduating into this level of Major League Baseball.
And they don't have a ton. Of Latin American players. If you look at, I know it's a stereotype kind of that the Orioles have their type of guy that they like, but it's hard to think of too many Latin American players that have cracked that lineup, right? Yeah. So that's a different look as well.
I think that was more historically true in a previous era, but now I think that they have a different reputation now, I think, in Latin America. They seem to be much more aggressive now. We're just seeing kind of like the first waves because of the delay. Kids sign at 16, they won't make their impact. Basallo is getting there at 21, and that is light speed.
Right.
Signing at 16 and getting to the big leagues at 21, that's getting there fast, and that's 5 years. So these things are usually laid and when you notice them.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to watch that team. Obviously, they got killed for the Stowers, Norby, Rogers trade, and I'm sure they probably would rather have Stowers performing the way he's performing, but Trevor Rogers pitching really well for them, so they're not like they left there empty-handed. So they have some pieces in place. Sticking on the Orioles, because this is the question we got to talk about, is with Adley Rutschman not having a great year. And he does have 2 more years of ARB, but he's already in ARB. Thank you for reminding me on that one. We'll talk about that in a second. But with having 2 more years of ARB for Adley Rutschman, you've drafted Caden Bodine and Ike Irish, and I understand you don't usually look at the draft and then look at your major league roster, but with the way college players are flying, last year's first round, you already have Chase Burns, Nick Kurtz, Caglione, Christian Moore, Cam Smith, all up. Guys like Bazana, Weatherholt, they're like knocking on the door strong. Most of these guys are going to be in the bigs sooner than later that were in this class of college player that you would put Ike Irish in or put Caden Bodine in. Do we start talking about Adley Rutschman being potentially a trade candidate or maybe a value extension candidate since he's not playing that great right now? Maybe you can get him in a lower number. How do you see Adley Rutschman fitting into all this with a guy like Basallo? Let's assume that Basallo performs close to his level of AAA. We've seen with Caglione. He could go sideways. You can see with Kurtz. Sometimes it happens. So let's assume Basallo performs. The defensive projection holds, and he's a catcher, at least a competent catcher, adequate catcher. How does that impact the way you look at like an Adley Rutschman?
I think catchers that contribute offensively, I think Cal Raleigh is skewing our perception of the position. It's usually not super loaded, and Will Smith with the Dodgers also skewing our perception a little bit. There's just not that many guys that can provide total value from that catcher position. And I think it takes a little longer to get there as a catcher. So while your bat may be ready, your defensive ability to catch at the major league level, your bat could be well advanced to that, and you could net out at an average place because at the catcher position, it's so consequential to be an impactful defender. That
Agustin Ramirez.
Yeah, it's just your bat can get there faster, catching is slower. That's why I'm a little less as many college guys that have made the quick transfer, I haven't seen any of those guys be catchers. Catcher is just a longer arc. And
probably since Rutschman.
Yeah, and having seen the full arc of Adley Rutschman, I watched him as a elite player in college at Oregon State and watched him in his progression through the major leagues here. I see no reason why the things he does can't work offensively. He's always on the favorable side of the split because he is a true switch hitter. Mm-hmm. So he's never in a bad matchup position. There's power, there's physicality. He's a solid to plus defensive catcher. And I don't see that just being displaced because a guy can hit at that position. Like if they're not providing total value at that position, it's harder to. If it's me, I'm on the side of extending Adley Rutschman, maybe at a little more of a controlled rate because of the downturn in production. But I think it's just catchers are hard to come by, really hard to come by. So I think Cal Raleigh is one of the most elite assets in all of baseball because he's really doing it on both sides. But that's not the norm, and they're hard to find. So the fact that you have a DH and you have first base capabilities in Basallo, and maybe even outfield capabilities at some point, I think I'd rather have all those bats and find a way to work around them. But I wouldn't be so quick to pull the trigger on Rutschman just because of a down year. I think these things with catchers, they just take a little more time. And I'm still bullish on Adley Rutschman overall. So
listen, if a GM, let's say, had their eyes on a Basallo when he was 19 years old, well, he was already a prospect then, but let's say when he was 16 years old, right, coming out, they didn't know, they had enough information on, they feel comfortable, they wanted to cross-check that evaluation to make sure they weren't overvaluing him before they wanted to acquire him. What could they have done back then to maybe get another extra set of eyes on a guy like Basallo?
It's a good question.
If a certain company was around.
So that's what a nice segue. I think I go back to what I was saying earlier. I think true emphasis on the amateur and early professional layers of this scouting. Amateur is before he's a professional, right? And early pro is like their first years in the complex league. So I think getting eyes and getting information, because the data you're going to have some access to, although more limited at the complex levels. But I think that what you could do is really get earlier looks, an earlier process on these players at a younger part. If it took him 5 years to get to the big leagues, you're watching him in year 1 and year 2, right? Like you could identify some of these things. And he was a little more obvious. Like I actually think he was gifted some of that value of a number 15 overall ranking. You've seen guys in their first few years of signing, Julio Rodriguez's and things like that, they'll get ranked toward the back of the top 30. Just because okay, he got money in the Latin American process, and therefore, we have to rank him high because they obviously like him. He would have been the equivalent of a first-round pick for the international department. I think Basallo was a little more in that category, would have been one of the top players in the class. Where I really think it shows up is in a guy like Ceddanne Rafaela, just to gravitate towards players that I've seen. Like if you would have identified early as a Florida Complex League player, as an A-ball player, or even he blew up a little bit in Greenville. He had his really good year in A-ball in Greenville. But if you saw him earlier and got aggressive or got conviction on the eval earlier, you could have made an aggressive trade to acquire him then. And that's where I think we segue into, I guess, our first real true sponsor, right, in terms of the show. And it's Club 31 Sports, a baseball company, which you and I have some vested interest in. But it's effectively a service to try to support that, right? To the term Club 31 is literally the 31st front office. So like in a outside of the 30-team bubble space, a way to implement baseball operations, scouting, player development processes more on an a la carte basis and an a la carte fashion at either the player level or zoomed out to the team level to help bolster really any baseball operations process, whether that be major league, other professional baseball, or collegiate sports, or even just one-off player. Like sometimes a player just needs to know something about the game. And really, you can think about this company more like a think tank about baseball and baseball operations overall that is staffed and thought of from the perspective of a front office, but it exists completely independently. So, Club 31 Sports, newest friend and sponsor of the show.
And already working with teams, not just pro, but college, right, in terms of helping them with their processes. So Club 31, write that one down. This man right here, Adrian Lorenzo, give you another layer of valuation and just thought that is outside your building, but obviously moving towards the same goal, which is winning baseball games. So, man, excited to get that one going.
Me too.
maybe they'll send you to Korea because a name that you're very familiar with. I'm looking at the KBO home run leaders is feeling like Marlins Twitter in 2019. We were all excited about all these guys, Austin Dean for one, but also Lewin Diaz, the Dominican left-handed hitting first baseman, big dude. I remember just as a Marlins prospect and briefly a Marlins player, power, great defense, great size, looked the part of a first baseman. Never quite put it together, but now part of the Sergio Romo trade going to Minnesota. He came back down to Miami. Now in the KBO. First in league in homers at 37. Number 2 is 27, so there's a huge gap there. 956 OPS. This guy's balling. Still only 28 years old. What can you tell me about Lewin Diaz, who's really tearing up in the KBO?
Oh, Lewin Diaz. Lewin Diaz is one of my favorite stories, processes, players. And he actually hit 38 last night. So he's got 38 homers right now. The next highest is Patrick Wisdom, who played for the Cubs at 27. And former friend of the Marlins, Austin Dean, with 22. But he is setting the KBO on fire from a power standpoint. And Lewin Diaz, man, I had high conviction that Lewin Diaz was going to hit at the big league level. If just all of his markers were strong. He was in the Minnesota Twins organization at the time, like you said, traded for Sergio Romo, who was acquired on a kind of a bit of a flyer deal by the Miami Marlins, would go on and have a really good run with them in the first half of the season, and then extract a lot of value. You know, like the Twins shouldn't have been giving up Lewin Diaz for Sergio Romo at the time, but Sergio Romo was so valuable to them in that pocket of time that it actually made a lot of sense. And on the Marlins side, I thought that was one of the better trades that we made in terms of value for value, because we really liked a lot of the things we saw from Lewin Diaz. He was also a left natural first baseman with a lot of really high defensive grades as a first baseman overall, which is not something people really, plus defender doesn't always travel with first baseman for whatever reason, especially left-handed. So there's like a really sweet fielding, sweet swinging left-handed prospect that was doing a lot of damage in high A ball and double A.
Since he's only 6'2", he felt bigger to me. Maybe it was just the way he played. It seemed like he just like a bigger presence out there at first.
He was never an undersized player, so I don't know if he falls somewhere between medium and large, or but I think he was a big physical dude. He always had like a bigger, stronger lower half. Lewin Diaz was also a lot thicker earlier. He was like one of those prospects, like he got a lot of comps to David Ortiz, like body physicality wise, but then would lean out later on while not sacrificing too much of the power. But Lewin hit all through the minor leagues and just hit that stalling point at the big league level of not being able to impact the ball consistently, not being able to leverage swing decisions and really cover the fastball in a way that would allow you to stick in the big leagues for a long time. At that snapshot in time, right? Because he's just 28. So when I was watching him, it was more 24, 25, 26 years. And just he kind of fizzled at the big league level. I think Orioles claimed him, played for the Orioles organization after the Marlins organization. But then now finding his groove or finding a swing and finding value in the KBO in Korea. So I love stories like this, man. I love, like, this is, Nick Martinez isn't a super dissimilar story. He was an MPB, but this is KBO. The KBO is a little more of an offensively driven league. A lot more like kind of semi-inflated offensive numbers.
But he's ahead of everybody else.
But he's several standards of deviation away from everybody else. And so I think he's setting himself up to be considered for a return to stateside baseball.
That was my question.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
With the defense being what it is.
Yeah, there was a guy, I don't know if you're named Mel Rojas Jr. as well, who for a long time set the KBO on fire, but never got that big league side of the deal to... There's some hesitancy with KBO translation into MLB translation. And so that's why I don't, Austin Dean has not he's been having pretty good seasons over there for a while, but
all you can do is hit though. So this guy, you could put him at first, right?
This guy you can put him at first. And he really plus defending first base receiver as well, in addition to just catches a lot of ground balls. Remember, Lewin is a really advanced receiver at first base, which I value quite a bit. We talk about Freddie Freeman a lot in here too. I've spoken about Mitch Moreland, guys that can really move the needle by just bailing the entire infield out, not just covering range on ground balls and out completion. But this power surge, I think, puts him at the very least in a position to garner a really interesting spring training invite from somebody, unless there's a good amount of money waiting for him to come back and re-sign with the KBO. He may have just found a place. Maybe his family's there and comfortable. Like, I've heard South Korea is beautiful at times. I've heard it's just a really good, positive experience for baseball players overall. And so I think he's going to have the chance to come back if he wants to, but I wouldn't be surprised if he, kind of rides it out into KBO success for a long time. And good for the KBO.
Like, if I'm the Marlins, if he's better than what you had in the first go around, he's going to be an improvement over how you played at first base this year. I'm just picking of a team that's struggling at first. So you could see places where he would fit and not have to replace a Freddie Freeman. But there's, there's holes where a guy like this, he's been in the majors. He's not a total unknown. You have major league film on him. Interesting.
The Marlins haven't had too many historic precedents in terms of professional players playing for them in the major leagues after having success in the KBO or an MPB. So their Asian professional presence isn't large. I can't speak to what that process looks like now, to be honest. I was head of international there, and my main focus as head of international was Latin America.
Right.
We couldn't be everywhere, therefore we targeted the places that we could be. And I don't know how much they've, separated from that. And I wonder how this looks analytically. Like, do the exit velos match it? Do the trajectories of the ball, do the analytic layers of this also match outward numbers from Lewin? And it looks like it does.
For KBO, do you have all that? Is it equivalent if let's say a player plays for Tennessee Volunteers and a player is doing this in the KBO? Do you have the same amount of data on that KBO player as the Tennessee Volunteer player?
At this point in time, yes. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, the data was more limited coming out of Asia, but now TrackMan is a little more prevalent across the board. And therefore, I just think you are working off of pitch data and therefore off the bat data. So I think there's definitely some visibility into it. You as a team have to buy into it. But I think it's a little harder for guys to just fall through the cracks that are like impact performers, right? And that's why I think we've seen some high-profile position player signings out of the KBO, but they've been more Korean players than they've been guys returning to the MLB after a stint in the KBO. I don't know what the obstacle is there, but hopefully Lewin breaks that.
We'll be following that one and more, always looking at international, MLB, amateur. We take it all the way through. Remember to like and subscribe to this show. Check out Club 31. Yeah, man, fire it up. This is it's the dog days, but we're about to get to the stretch here where it's going to get very, very exciting. It already is exciting, man. Dog days are good too. For Adrian Lorenzo, I'm Danny Enriquez, El Big League Show. See you guys next week.